See, I'm not in the city. I'm out in the woods. Nah, we don't want to listen to traffic. So I'm going to begin Penny's book today, and I'm just going to read the introductory stuff. So at the back, there's a poem at the beginning, and the introduction. And then that can help you determine if you want to listen to the story or not. So this again is the book, Polishing the Bones, by Penny, or Penelope. And that's her right there. She was my trip sitter during holotropic breathwork, so we became quite close over that week. And I'm gonna leave. I asked her if I could share her email with you, so you could reach out to her if you felt the need, or if you felt you wanted to say thank you or whatever. But she said she didn't want me to share her personal email, but she did give me her website. So, and you can find a way to contact her through that if you wish. So, yeah. Polishing the Bones, Penelope, Tarasuk. An intimate portrayal of a woman's unfolding inner journey through her Jungian analysis, her dreams, and her terminal illness as she is guided deeper into the mysteries of life and the extraordinary transformation of her death. This is the story of Laura's creative journey towards her completion, with all its longing, pain, transcendent beauty, and love. After the conclusion of her Jungian analysis, Laura becomes terminally ill, and her former analyst comes to live with the family to help her die. The intimacy and depth of relationship between the two women and the foundation of guiding dreams form a container for an unfolding spiritual journey with numinous experience and sacred visions. We witness the tender care of Laura through and after her death, as well as the experience of the author, who undergoes her own transformation through an awe-inspiring initiation into the realm of death itself. And she wrote a little note for me: for Gary, for your journey to the heart, you are a brilliant diamond. Now for the polishing. With love, Penny. And here's a small poem. Nothing's a gift. Nothing's a gift. It's all on loan. I'm drowning in debts up to my ears. I'll have to pay for myself with myself. Give up my life for my life. Here's how it's arranged. The heart can be repossessed, the liver too, and each single finger and toe. Too late to tear up the terms. My debts will be repaid, and I'll be fleeced. Or, more precisely, flayed. I move about the planet in a crush of other debtors. Some are saddled with the burden of paying off their wings. Others must, willy-nilly, account for every leaf. Every tissue in us lies on the debit side. Not a tentacle or tendril is for keeps. The inventory, infinitely detailed, implies we'll be left not just empty-handed, but handless too. I can't remember when, where, and why I let someone open this account in my name. We call the protest against this the soul, and it's the only item not included on the list. By Wisława Szymborska. View with a grain of sand. Selected poems. Introduction. This narrative is based on a true story of a woman's journey into the depth of meaning of her life and into her untimely dying with the help of her dreams, her art, her husband, friends, and a woman Jungian psychoanalyst. This is the story of a cement truck. This is the story of a long and deep psychological treatment I undertook with a middle-aged woman I call Laura, who was in many ways every woman. In her life, she had many roles: mother, sister, daughter, wife, artist, muse, friend, partner, former wife, stepmother, employee, naturalist, activist, employer, and student. Laura was my patient for nearly 8 years, meeting many challenges, including profound illness with creativity and grace. She died at age 64 following a life of emotional and mental openness, curiosity, and wonder. We met consistently over 7 years, both of us taking time away from her treatment for travel and family matters. I witnessed as Laura reported her dreams and began to experience the power and depth of symbols. Our roles reversed in the last 3 months as her life came to a completion through a fateful illness. She became my teacher in dying and death. The continuous stream of dreams from her unconscious over 7 years provided aqua vitae, the water of life, for her deep spiritual thirst. She willingly and honestly worked with life's challenges. The psychological work with this patient over time was mutually, deeply transformative. I feel that I became a more mature analyst and a more compassionate human being in this process. Laura died in a state of peace. I was present at her side. The following year, I began writing as a creative way of reflecting on life and death, grieving, and honoring the relationship between us. Although the heart of this story is inspired by true events, it is a story. Many details are changed, as are descriptions of people, places, dates, identities, events, and dialogue, in order to protect privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity. The essence of the story is preserved, and Laura's dreams are presented as she reported them. She wanted me to make use of her life story, dreams, and journals through writing and teaching for the purpose of helping others in their discovery of life's meaning, which might lead them to a greater sense of peace as they reach the completion of their lives. Laura and her husband gave me explicit permission. Memory is imperfect, and we inevitably distort what we see and experience through our flawed human lens and personal complexes, no matter how well-trained or well-intended we may be. I ask that my readers accept the truth of these limitations. This story is communicated with compassion, sensitivity, and every attempt at essential honesty. Laura and her husband, Eugene, came from modest families and were encouraged to seek higher education. They had the good fortune of being physically attractive, socially at ease, intelligent, capable of humor, and highly verbal. People wanted to be around them. Like so many people, they personally and as a couple suffered different degrees of early emotional neglect and challenge, physical and medicinal limitations, personal disappointments, a range of traumas, and many emotional losses. The couple had the capacity, discipline, and motivation to work long hours, and the willingness to do research in attempts to solve challenging problems. They could ask for help, receive it, and were able to offer help to others. They were creative and worked as an effective team. The illusion of an easy life distorts the harsh realities and stresses that are a real part of such lives. Their work included many failures, and disappointments. Their challenges and stubborn refusal to give up in the face of many disappointments fueled their success. Their curiosity, well-developed organizational skills, business acumen, foresight, and generosity with others served them well in their lives. We cannot know what we will face in life or in dying. Each of us will use whatever resources we have, no matter how limited. We learn from Laura's story what is most important, that we need present, compassionate human relationships to feel fully alive, and if possible, many of us want to be surrounded by compassionate relationships in our dying. The story follows Laura's Jungian psychoanalysis in a linear form. The treatment follows her understanding in our initial phone conversation that I planned to relocate from Boston to Santa Fe, New Mexico. This would take place in several years. In this phone conversation, she declined my referral to another colleague, a well-respected, highly experienced woman Jungian analyst. Why am I confusing analyst? Analysis and analyst, that's why. Those two are getting mixed up. Woman Jungian analyst. Laura made the decision to start with me. In anticipation of my future relocation, we discussed a possible plan to continue therapy when that time came. At that time, we discussed weekly telephone sessions and an intensive week of face-to-face meetings in Boston 4 times a year. After I moved, Laura would be invited to have sessions in person anytime she traveled to Santa Fe. In the course of her therapy, Laura recorded several hundred dreams in numerous journals. She loved to write, handwrote her dreams, and sent copies of over 300 dreams that we worked with in treatment. Laura's analysis and dream work began prior to the explosion of email usage and our current collective dependence on communication technologies. In this book, I select a limited number of specific dreams to illustrate her response to the ongoing therapeutic work, and as examples of expressions from her unconscious. The reader is invited into Laura's psychic process, as well as my internal reflections. Throughout this narrative, I share my thoughts, many of which were not spoken aloud to Laura during the analysis. I knew it was important for her to have her own bodily, mental, emotional experience, and associations during the sessions. I did share many thoughts and responses with her throughout the years. I suggested that she follow up some sessions by reading and researching books and articles to deepen her experience and knowledge of her symbolic material and context of geography, historical events, creatures, and stories from many cultures. I strongly encouraged her to express her feelings through art, poetry, active imagination, and dance between our sessions. She followed these suggestions and encouragements with curiosity. She was a student of humanities, interested in a wide range of arts, ideas, science, environmental concerns, and politics. At a crucial point in her early development, approaching early childhood memories, Laura searched through many boxes shipped from her earlier home. The boxes had been stored unopened for years. She found the one containing her doll, handmade by her mother, as well as all the doll's clothing her mother made. She washed and ironed each piece, taking time to remember and feel details of her early life. She brought the doll and clothing into her session, literally and figuratively, unpacking emotional memories. This was a turning point in her, as well as in our relationship. A tender, deep trust was being secured. She, like most children, stored and projected a great deal of her early emotional life onto a physical object. For Laura, the object was her doll and clothing. Trusting the trajectory of her psyche and dreams, I followed her as she experienced and integrated psychological, emotional work. I was often amazed and humbled. My job was to listen closely and encourage her to delve deeper into feelings. The emergence of concerns that she had pushed out of consciousness due to shame and fear and the many distractions of life now had a safe place for expression. Work with shadow material is often felt as shameful to our ego consciousness and conflicts with the persona we present to the world. We all have shadow material in the unconscious in one form or another. I supported her creative expression and curiosity. She found new teachers and learned new skills. Much later during her analysis, she began to study ancient Greek. Traditional Jungian analysis was the structure or form or frame of our therapeutic work. Our analytic relationship was essential. The sacred vessel, or temenos, where transformation was underway. What I didn't realize until later was how much I too was being transformed in and by the depth of this treatment and this relationship. We shared a positive transference and countertransference that supported this long, deep work. We shared an unnamed, unarticulated experience of love. This was not an erotic or sexual transference. It was a gift in the realm of the heart, the soul, agape. Late in her therapeutic treatment, after extensive medical tests and biopsies, Laura was diagnosed with a terminal medical illness. The time came for the formal termination of our traditional Jungian analytic work. Laura realized that the demands of her putting her life's affairs in order and anticipating increasing issues of physicality were radically changing. After reflection and discussion, she and her husband, whom I'd had no contact with in the previous 7 years, called to ask if I would consider coming to help them, during her dying. We entered into a different and very direct conversation. The relationship they proposed was a new role, a new configuration of tasks, and a new vessel or frame of working together. Laura asked me directly to consider the possibility of helping her die. All would take place in their home. We made a formal, explicit business contract. I was paid for my work, and they paid travel expenses. I was invited to live with them. I would be given a private room of my own, and I would work as part of a circle of caregivers. I would come every other week, to live for a full week through her death. In this story, I speak more in depth about my experience of this transition into Laura's end of life, her dying and death. I take full responsibility for my thoughts, reflections, attempts to describe my way of analytic work, and my behavioral decisions in the course of this treatment and the writing of this book. Although my psychotherapeutic and analytic education was traditional, my decision to accompany Laura and her family at the end of her life was unorthodox, not part of my institution education or training, and does not represent the attitudes, nor is it endorsed by the New England Society of Jungian Analysts, and is not part of the C.G. Jung Institute of Boston Limited program of training and practice. Contemplating death and dying. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a Swiss psychiatrist working in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Chicago in 1965. She was approached by 4 theology students at the Chicago Theological Seminary asking for her help with a research project on crisis in human life. After discussions, they agreed that death was the biggest crisis that people faced. Traditional research parameters and data collection methods were intrusive at such a vulnerable time in a person's life. They decided upon a new approach, interviewing terminally ill patients and reversing traditional roles. The patients were to become their teachers. Kubler-Ross's first book, On Death and Dying, was based upon what they learned about patients' coping mechanisms at the time of a terminal illness. She wrote about the importance of the patient's feelings of isolation and fear, and need for close human relationships, especially as the time of dying approached. No one at the hospital seemed to have the specific role of speaking with the dying patients about their feelings and experience of the dying process. Patients in the study expressed gratitude for the presence of skilled listeners who had a willingness to talk about death and dying. From her observations, Kubler-Ross postulated 4 emotional stages of dying: denial, anger, depression, and resignation or acceptance. These stages were not seen as a direct or smooth process of moving forward, but rather as forward movement with times of regression. Each person has a unique form of expression and timing in the dying process. I attended one of Kubler-Ross's public talks on death and dying in 1974 in Washington, D.C. At the time, I was finishing graduate school and planning to move to Boston to work. I listened to a surprisingly small, bird-like woman wearing glasses, speaking with a heavy German accent. She reviewed much of what was in her 1969 book and spoke about hospice, an organization begun by an Englishwoman physician, Dame Cecily Saunders, MD, OBE, author of Care of the Dying. I'd never heard of hospice. After the talk, I approached Dr. Kubler-Ross to thank her for the presentation and her work on behalf of so many. I remember feeling her delicate bones in that handshake. She had set out to change this country's attitudes and behavior toward death and dying, and was speaking for thousands of patients who had no voice or were too compromised to talk or fight for more humane care. Deeply impressed by this small, powerfully articulate woman of conviction, I wanted to know more. After settling in Boston, I wrote to her, asking where I could further study the subject of death and dying. She promptly wrote back a personal letter suggesting that I meet with her colleagues at the Massachusetts General Hospital Department of Psychiatry and Reverend Dr. Mwalimu Imara. He was teaching at Boston University and acting as the minister of the Arlington Street Church in Boston. His work with the terminally ill began when he was Kubler-Ross's assistant and colleague in her initial death and dying seminars at the University of Chicago. I contacted Reverend Dr. Imara, and with his mentor's referral, was immediately invited to join his class. The small group seminar met one evening a week for several months. Each member of the group was asked to contemplate their own dying, death, and the deaths of beloved family members. I was 27 years old. Excuse me. It was the first time that I had thought with any depth and maturity about my own death and mortality. I'd formerly thought about being killed, being in accidents, but I'd never consciously reflected on a slow, considered dying process, especially after a long life. I hadn't thought much about my own aging, but there I did. In this group, I imagined myself into the future, becoming very old. I had the sensation that I was literally drying up, and then the wind blew me away like late autumn leaves. It was so natural. Although I had been present at the deaths of animals and had known of deaths, now I realized that my dying would happen, and that death is like birth, simply a part of our nature, our human condition. We were asked to contemplate our funeral or memorial services. The profundity of this course was daunting, humbling, and humanizing. There was no distancing or intellectualizing through books and talks. Dr. Imara opened us up to another level of reality. He asked us to dwell upon what was formerly unimaginable. With his help, I was able to think about and imagine death. The subtle and unconscious psychological defense of denial of death is very powerful. Ernest Becker received the Pulitzer Prize for his book, The Denial of Death. He delved into the psychological defense of denial of death and discussed his understanding and philosophy of life. Death and dying swiftly dropped into my unconscious as I immersed my young adult life in love and work, ego and personality development, homemaking, art, meditation, 2 pregnancies and births, raising a family, and my Jungian psychoanalytic training. It was the time of establishing and belonging to communities. Occasional realizations about death returned to my consciousness, such as during my natural childbirth's labor, and when medical test results were alarming. I had the luxury and blessing that no one close to me emotionally died during those years. When someone else's death happened, I unconsciously avoided deep reflection. Unless death was personal, very close, it was easier to deny. The education of a Jungian psychoanalyst. The word psychoanalyst is used as a general descriptive term in this story. A Jungian psychoanalysis contains the meaning and practices of psychotherapy and includes a wide range of depth psychologies and dream work. All Jungian psychoanalysts develop first through the work of preparing to be a psychotherapist in its true ancient Greek meaning, the attendants who served the god by carrying out the prescribed ritual, therapeutes. C.A. Meyer, author of Ancient Incubation and Modern Psychotherapy, states, the most famous physician of late antiquity was Galen, who styled himself the therapeute of his fatherly god, Asclepius. The divine physician healer had appeared to Galen in a dream. In antiquity, everything to do with the psyche or soul was embedded in religion. We could say that Asclepius carries or evokes the archetype of divine physician or healer, the one who tends to the body and soul, and one who invites the patient to seek healing dreams. Through our dreams, the process of inner healing can be expressed. Healing does not necessarily mean curing an illness in the physical body. Healing is related to creating a meaningful life, a life that strives toward greater wholeness that includes death, a life that values relatedness and compassion. Throughout this story, I choose to use the descriptive word patient instead of the word client. I find that most people come into therapeutic treatment because they are in pain, suffering bodily, emotionally, and in soul. I find that the word client has an association or feel of business and commerce exchange in the material world. Indeed, there is a business, financial aspect, and exchange that must be dealt with professionally, realistically, and responsibly. I find that the real meaning in analytic or depth psychotherapy is the work with dis-ease in the emotional, mental, social, and spiritual life of the patient. Becoming an analyst is a lengthily and deeply meaningful commitment of postgraduate studies, MD, MA, MSW, PhD, PSYD, and EDD. I don't know what any of those mean, except for PhD. I entered into my analytic training at the fledgling C.G. Jung Institute of Boston in the spring of 1979. One of the first 4 students, I was the only woman and newly pregnant with my first son. I received my diploma in Jungian analysis in 1988, mother of 2 sons. I took brief leaves of absence around the time of my children's births, and was fortunate to have and continue a private practice in a renovated carriage house, separate from our home. My husband, a child psychologist, was a wonderful father and supportive partner. As demanding as it was in those early years, I found that giving birth naturally, nursing, attaching, and creating a secure holding environment for my sons helped me to understand and embody the many concepts and theories I was studying intellectually. Like medical surgeons or other specialists, analysts in training devote many years of study under the tutelage of experienced colleagues who've practiced this art and science for many years. To enter the profession of a Jungian analyst, one usually feels a calling or a sense of vocation. It is work in psychology and psychotherapy with a spiritual core. My professional life in human service developed over many years before I even considered psychoanalytic education. By 1975, when I began a Jungian analysis, I had already experienced years of psychotherapy for myself. I had worked for 13 years as a psychotherapist in many settings, inpatient and outpatient, and with people of many races, cultures, and classes. It is a long road to develop the abilities and to earn the privilege to practice and work with such deep intimacy. In this field, we analysts, unlike surgeons and many other specialists, must commit to work on our own psychic sufferings and patterns of behavior prior to and during training. We are required to deeply examine our lives in our own treatment with more experienced colleagues before and during treatment of patients. Jungian analytic studies include psychological theories of human development and a variety of treatment modalities, world religions and spiritual practices, anthropology and cultural studies, world mythologies, fairy tales, and folklore. We study psychiatry, psychopathology, basic psychopharmacology, ethics, qualitative research, and clinical research in neurobiology and the developing brain. We study contemporary issues such as violence in society, war, international terrorism, contemporary issues of use and effects of technology in human development, and the use of technology and media in analytic practice. The consequences of poverty, domestic violence, rape, legal and illegal immigration concerns, the long shadow of racism, public health, economics, gender expression and inequality, and world politics are part of our analytic education and analytic society's discussions. Patients are aware of and affected by these issues and events, and often bring dreams about these subjects into our treatment. What we cannot cover in seminars, we are encouraged to research and make use of the broad array of educational resources and opportunities in our urban area. My personal introduction to the psychology of Carl Jung. I was introduced to the work of Dr. Carl Gustav Jung in my early childhood. He was a Swiss medical doctor and psychiatrist, 1875 to 1961, who lived during a time of the emergence of great interest in the unconscious, the psyche. Formerly influenced by his senior mentor, Dr. Sigmund Freud, Jung was interested in the conscious aspects of psyche and the effects of the unconscious on consciousness. He felt that the meaning of life was motivated by a spiritual source of life, not solely through instinctual drives. He developed a theory of archetypal psychology. He explored into the depths of his own unconscious, most notably illustrated in his personal journal, The Red Book, published in 2009. His study of spirituality, world religions, mythology, and anthropology informed his thinking and theories. He is well known for his deep interest in dreams and non-ordinary experiences, including archetypal states of mystery, numinosity, and synchronicity. In my childhood, between the ages of 4 to 8, my father was in therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, related to his World War II experiences as a U.S. Navy diver. He had been part of a team of highly experienced deep-sea divers who were assembled and brought to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, immediately after the bombings, December 1941. He descended repeatedly into the sunken, catastrophically exploded, and tangled battleships in attempts to save many endangered lives and to retrieve the dead bodies of hundreds of lost servicemen. The trauma of his terrifying and profoundly dangerous Navy experiences evoked or triggered emotionally overwhelming memories of losses of family members and his own traumatic experiences in childhood. The Veterans Administration of the U.S. sent a psychologist, Dr. Gordon Tice, to my grandmother's home in Washington, D.C., where my family was living. I remember this psychologist as a kind, tall man with gold-rimmed glasses. He was a psychotherapist who described himself as a Jungian, someone deeply influenced by the ideas of Carl Jung, and he was a Unitarian minister. Dr. Tice and my father sat in our open living room during their weekly meetings. Curious and concerned, I was sometimes allowed to sit nearby on the floor. They discussed many things, including the works of Freud, Jung, Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, and world religions. My father spoke of his experiences of war, his personal history, and the human condition. Dr. Tice encouraged him to paint pictures, carve statues, and write stories. I remember my father carving a wooden statue of a whale and a painting. It was Moby Dick and a tiny wooden rowboat with oars set in a turbulent ocean. After home-based psychotherapeutic treatment was terminated, my father and Dr. Tice exchanged meaningful and deeply cherished correspondence regularly for 35 years, until my father's death. My father developed a library of books on many psychological subjects, including books on existential psychology and the history of World War II. I looked at books on the Holocaust, illustrated with numerous official photographs. I couldn't comprehend the idea or reality of Holocaust or death, but I was aware of terror and suffering. The seeds of my interest in the arts, philosophy, spirituality, psychology, and the human condition, including good and evil, took root very early, shaping my life and vocation. The suffering of my family and humanity was not veiled in my early life. My father experienced the dark night of his soul, a psychotic descent into his unconscious, and fortunately, and with skilled help, he emerged a more whole, more psychologically integrated person able to resume a productive life in our family and society. And that's that. That's the introduction. I will also leave a link to her book, which is on Amazon. If you're interested in buying it, you can also just Google or just search Polishing the Bones or her name, Penelope Tarasuk. So I'm going to work that into the weekly routine along with Steven's book. I don't think I can do more than 2 at once. I won't have any time for anything else. So anyway, hope everybody's doing well, and I'll see you next time.